She doesn't belong here. Get her off my range. Commander Donovan said it loud enough for everyone to hear. The instructors laughed. The trainees laughed. A young blonde woman standing at the gate holding nothing but a photograph and 30 years of grief didn't flinch. Didn't leave. She said quietly, "Mind if I try?" What happened next silenced every man on that range. Then it broke a record no one had touched in 40 years. But that morning, nobody knew her name. Nobody knew her father died saving the man who just laughed at her. And nobody knew that in 36 hours, she'd be the only thing standing between a warlord's blade and an American hostage's throat. If this story moves you, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels, the weight of 31 years. The morning fog over Coronado came in low and quiet the way it always did in early autumn, rolling off of the Pacific like it had somewhere important to be. The training range stretched out across the flatlands east of the naval base, a long scar of packed earth, target frames, and wind flags spaced at careful intervals. To civilians, it looked like nothing. To the men who trained there, it was a cathedral. Commander Jack Donovan had been walking this range for 11 years as chief instructor. Before that, he'd been doing something far less comfortable, bleeding on foreign soil, watching good men die, making decisions that kept him awake until 3 in the morning for 3 decades running. At 62, he carried himself the way old war horses do, straight back, deliberate, with a jaw that had forgotten how to be anything other than set. His hair had gone fully silver sometime around 2008, and his eyes, pale gray, permanently narrowed, had the quality of a man who was always measuring distances even when there was nothing to measure. He had earned his rest. Everyone said so. He had not taken it. Everyone knew that too. On this particular Tuesday, Donovan was standing 40 yards behind the firing line, watching a trainee named Cortez work through a 200-yard problem. Cortez was good, possibly great. He had the natural stillness that the best snipers carry in their DNA, that rare human ability to become for a few seconds completely inanimate. Donovan watched the young man's breathing pattern, watched the subtle rise and fall of his shoulders, watched the moment he found his respiratory pause. The shot broke clean. Donovan walked forward, picked up his binoculars, confirmed the hit, said nothing. Silence from Donovan was the highest praise a trainee could receive. His radio crackled. Master Chief Dennis Okafor, his range safety officer, a barrel-chested man from Lagos by way of Norfolk, Virginia. "Commander, you've got a visitor at the main gate. Civilian, young woman. She's a pause." The pause was unusual. Okafor didn't pause. "She's asking for you specifically, sir, by name. Says it's personal." Donovan lowered the binoculars. "Tell her to call the public affairs office." "I told her that, sir. And she said," and I'm quoting directly, "tell Commander Donovan that Thomas Mitchell says hello." The binoculars came down all the way. Donovan stood very still for a moment, the same stillness he'd watched Cortez achieve, except this one had nothing to do with marksmanship. It had to do with a name he hadn't spoken out loud in years, even though he thought it almost every day. "Thomas Mitchell. Ghost. Send her through," he said. He turned back towards the range and watched Cortez cycle the bolt on his rifle with the practiced ease of a man who didn't know that the world had just shifted 400 yards to the left. She was not what he expected. I wasn't sure what he expected, honestly. Maybe someone broken, someone searching. A daughter raised without a father sometimes carries that absence like a wound you can see from across the room, a hollowness around the eyes, a way of holding themselves slightly apart from everything, as though they never quite learned how to trust that solid ground stays solid. Sarah Mitchell did not look like that. She looked like she'd been built in a machine shop and finished by hand. Medium height, athletic in the functional way, rather than the aesthetic way, the kind of muscle you get from actually doing things, rather than preparing to look like you do them. Blonde hair pulled back with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd decided a long time ago that hair was a logistics problem, not a vanity opportunity. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray jacket, but she moved through the base the way people move through spaces they've studied on a map. Not lost, not tentative, just new. She found Donovan at the edge of the parking area near the range's administrative building. She walked straight to him without hesitation, which told him something. A lot of people, even trained people, approach a man who looks like Donovan with a degree of social caution. She didn't. She stopped 3 feet away and looked him in the eye. She held out a photograph. He took it. He already knew what it was. Part of him had known, since Okafor said the name on the radio. He looked at it anyway. Ghost Mitchell, at about 28 years old, grinning that lopsided grin that had been utterly incapable of looking serious even when the situation called for it. He was in civvies standing in front of Donovan's squinted some kind of shooting range, an outdoor range, desert background. His right arm was around a woman who must have been Sarah's mother, and his left hand was pressed flat over his heart in a theatrical gesture of mock sincerity. Donovan remembered the day this was taken, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, 1991. Ghost had just won a bet involving a 900-yard cold bore shot and was performing what he called his victory lap of humility, which involved telling everyone within earshot exactly how lucky he'd been while doing a slow, gracious bow. He had been magnificent and insufferable and utterly irreplaceable, and he had been dead for 31 years. "You're Sarah," Donovan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." He handed the photograph back. "You look like him." "I know." She tucked the photo carefully into her jacket pocket. "I've been told." "How'd you find me?" "Same way I find in everything. Research patience and being willing to call a lot of phone numbers." "A beat. You're not exactly hiding, Commander. Chief Instructor at Coronado. Your name's on a plaque in the lobby of the admin building." He almost smiled. Almost. "What do you want, Sarah?" She met his eyes without blinking. "I want to shoot." He laughed. He didn't mean to. It just came out, not a mocking laugh exactly, but the involuntary exhale of a man hearing something unexpected from an unexpected direction. He caught himself immediately, but it was too late. The sound was out there, and he saw the way her jaw tightened when she heard it. "This is a United States Navy training facility," he said. "Civilians don't just, I know what it is." Her voice was steady. No heat in it, just the flat certainty of someone who'd rehearsed for resistance. "I also know that Thomas Mitchell died on October 3rd, 1993 in Mogadishu, Somalia, covering your withdrawal from a compromised position. I know he was 29 years old. I know he was hit 3 times before he went down, and that he kept shooting until he physically could not anymore. And I know—" She paused, just one beat. "I know you were the last person to see him alive." The range sounds continued around them. A rifle shot in the distance, wind in the target flags, and the low rumble of a truck somewhere on the base. Donovan said nothing. "I'm not here to blame you," Sarah said. "I want you to understand that clearly. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm not looking for closure in some therapeutic sense. I'm here because my father was the best shot he ever personally knew, and he spent the last letter he ever wrote my mother talking about how someday his kid was going to be even better." She held his gaze. "I've been working towards that my whole life. I just want a chance to show someone who would actually know the difference." Donovan studied her. 30 seconds, maybe 40. In 11 years as chief instructor, he'd had a lot of people try to talk their way onto his range. Veterans with something to prove. Competition shooters wanting to benchmark against military standards. Journalists wanting material. Curious civilians who'd seen something on the internet and convinced themselves they had potential. He turned them all away. He said, "Who trained you?" For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, more like satisfaction, the look of someone who's been waiting for the right question. "Carlos Hathcock's protege," she said. "2 of them. I started at age 9. He stared at her. "Hathcock has been dead since 1982, I know. 2 of the men he trained before he got sick took me on as a project when I was 9 years old. I've been on a range somewhere almost every weekend since then." A pause. "I also spent 3 years in West Texas working wind problems with a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Beaumont, and 2 summers in New Mexico doing elevation and altitude compensation with a long-range competition team." She reached into her jacket and produced a small notebook worn, the cover dark with use, and held it out to him. I took it. He opened it. The handwriting was dense, technical, meticulous. Wind drift tables. Bullet drop calculations at ranges from 500 yards to beyond 3,000. Notes on specific ammunition lots. Observations on environmental variables. It read like the journal of someone who had turned ballistics into a spiritual practice. Donovan closed the notebook. He held it a moment. He handed it back. "1 shot," he said. "Barrett M82A1. We'll start at 1,500 yards and see what happens." Something crossed her face, a brief, unguarded flash of something that might have been gratitude or might have been relief. It was gone, so fast he almost wasn't sure he'd seen it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. He turned back toward the range. Thank me if you don't embarrass yourself. Behind him, he heard her say quietly, almost to herself, I won't. The Barrett M82A1 is not a subtle instrument. It is 57 inches long. It weighs 29.5 pounds unloaded. It chambers around the 50-inch BMG that was originally designed to destroy aircraft and light armor. When it fires, the sound is not a bang. It is a physical event, a concussion that you feel in your chest wall, that reverberates in your back teeth, that reminds you in a very direct way that you are in the presence of something serious. Donovan had watched thousands of people shoot rifles. He had a system for evaluating a shooter before the first round was even chambered, because the way a person handles a weapon tells you almost everything about their relationship with it. Some people pick up a rifle like it's a tool they're planning to use correctly. Some pick it up like it's a toy that makes them feel important. Some pick it up like it's a problem they're going to solve. Sarah Mitchell picked up the Barrett the way you'd pick up something that belonged to you. Not aggressive, not reverent, just comfortable. Proprietary in a way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with familiarity. She ran her hands along the receiver, checked the chamber, worked the bolt once slowly, then settled it into the correct position with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this particular motion approximately 10,000 times. Okafor was watching from 2 steps behind Donovan. He kept his face carefully neutral, but Donovan caught the slight tilt of his head, the nonverbal equivalent of him. Donovan crouched behind and to Sarah's right, where he could observe both her position and the target through his spotting scope. 500 yards, he said. Wind is reading 8 to 10 from the left at this position, probably shifting at the midpoint. Standard B-27 silhouette. She didn't respond immediately. She was still settling, adjusting the bipod by a millimeter, finding her cheek weld, taking one slow breath in and releasing half of it. What's the temperature, she asked. 64 Fahrenheit. Humidity 71%. She made a small adjustment to the elevation dial that Donovan clocked immediately. It was the right adjustment. Down to the MOA. Ready when you are, she said. He looked through the spotting scope, checked the flags at the 500, 1 to 1,000, and 1,500 yard positions. Send it. The shot broke. In the scope, Donovan watched the bullet trace that faint shimmering disturbance in the air that a 50 BMG leaves behind and then watched the target. The silhouette jumped, dead center. Maybe a quarter-inch left of the geometric center of mass, which at 1,500 yards with a moderate crosswind was by any fair assessment virtually perfect. He said nothing. He looked at the target for 2 more seconds, cataloging what he'd seen, checking it against his internal database of 10,000 shots observed. Okafor said very quietly, so only Donovan could hear, Sir. I see it, Donovan said. He raised his voice for Sarah. Call your shot. Quartering left, and she said, expected the drift to be 2 inches more. It was 1.8. I'll take it. Donovan straightened up. He looked at Okafor. Okafor looked at him. They had the wordless conversation that men have when they've worked together long enough that facial muscles are sufficient. Push it to 200, Donovan said. She hit 200 yards. She hit 400. At 400 yards. Donovan's hands-on curiosity had transformed into something more complicated, a mixture of professional assessment, personal history, and something that was beginning to feel uncomfortably close to awe. He didn't experience awe easily. He'd earned in that immunity through 3 decades of watching genuinely exceptional people do genuinely exceptional things. It took a lot. Sarah Mitchell was doing a lot. Between shots, she was quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of concentration exactly, but the quiet of someone living inside a very detailed interior world. He'd seen it before in the best shooters. They went somewhere between rounds, somewhere internal and efficient, calculating and adjusting and modeling the next problem while their body reset. He sat down on the ground next to her position, an unusual thing for him to do. He wasn't a sit-on-the-ground kind of commander generally, but something about the moment called for it. Your father used to do that, he said. She turned her head slightly. Do what? Go somewhere between shots. Most people chatter. Fill the silence. He'd just disappear for a minute. Come back with better information somehow. She was quiet for a moment. Then tell me something about him. Donovan hadn't expected that. Not there, not mid-session, not in the specific charged air of a range with a .50 caliber rifle between them. He'd expected questions, eventually had been half dreading them since she'd walked through the gate. But not like this. Not quiet and simple and direct. How was funny, Donovan said. Not everyone knows that about good operators. You picture serious and Ghost was serious when it counted absolutely. But between the serious parts, he shook his head. He had this way of finding the one thing that was absurd about any situation and pointing at it until everyone else saw it too. Kept a lot of guys from losing their minds in bad places. Was he scared? She asked. Donovan looked at her. In Mogadishu, ever. Donovan thought about that honestly. It deserved honesty. Yes, he talked about it once, 1992. We were waiting for an extraction that was 4 hours late in a place where being late was a very serious problem. He said, Donovan stopped. Found the memory. He said, the fear is fine, it's data. The problem is when you start believing it's a prediction instead of a warning. He paused. I've used that maybe 500 times in 11 years of training. Sarah's eyes moved forward to the targets to the distance. He said something like that in a letter once. I found it in my mom's things after she passed. He wrote it in different words, but she stopped, swallowed once. Same idea. Donovan said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't land wrong. Push it to 2800 she said. 2800 yards. That was the number that changed the room, metaphorically speaking, because they were on an open range, but the effect was the same. When Donovan called the mark on the radio to Okafor, at the far end there was a silence on the frequency that was 2 full seconds longer than it should have been. And then say again, Commander. 2800 yards, Master Chief. Set the marker. Another pause. Copy that. Donovan's personal best, a shot he had made in 2007 on a range in Nevada. A shot he was reasonably proud of, a shot that had been the range record at Coronado for going on 16 years, was 2,743 yards. Sarah didn't know that. He hadn't told her. She was doing her calculations now, working through the notebook, cross-referencing with a small ballistic app on her phone, muttering numbers under her breath. The Coriolis effect at this distance was not theoretical anymore. It was measurable, it was relevant, it had to be dialed in. The bullet would be in flight for roughly 4 seconds. In 4 seconds, the Earth rotates. In 4 seconds, the wind at the muzzle and the wind at the midpoint and the wind at the target are potentially 3 different problems. She dialed adjustments, settled, breathed. Donovan watched through the scope. The shot broke. He found the trace, tracked it, watched. The target moved. He kept the scope on it for 5 full seconds after impact, recalibrating what he'd seen, making sure he'd seen it. Then he said very carefully, that's a hit. From 2 steps back, Okafor said something in Yoruba that Donovan didn't understand. The tone told him everything he needed to know. Sarah stayed still behind the rifle for a moment. Her face was forward, her jaw set, her eyes on the distance. Then she said, he deserved to see that. Donovan understood. He didn't say he did. Some things you just carry. You want to try 2851? He asked. She turned and looked at him. Is that your record? He held her gaze. It was the range record. Held it for 16 years. She turned back to the rifle, dialed the adjustment, settled. Mind if I try? She said. He almost said something, stopped himself. Let the silence be what it needed to be. Send it, he said. The shot broke. In 40 years of Coronado history, shifted by 108 yards. Afterward, in the silence that follows, something that doesn't have an immediate name. Donovan sat across from Sarah Mitchell in the administrative building's small break room. 2 cups of coffee, neither of them was really drinking. The range outside was quiet now. The trainees had been given an early release, not officially for any particular reason, but Okafor had made it happen as he made most necessary things happen without being asked. Where do you go from here? Donovan asked. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug. I hadn't thought past today, honestly. A pause. It's not entirely true, but today was, she stopped, started again differently. My whole life, this thing existed as a destination. Today was the destination. I don't know what the next destination is yet. What did your mother think about all this? The training. Something went quiet in her face. She died 4 years ago. She thought she supported it. She wasn't sure about the goal, but she understood what it meant. Another pause. She used to say that some people grieve out loud and some people grieve through action. She grieved out loud. A small gesture, self-evident. Donovan nodded. He understood that particular language. Your father would have been proud, he said. He meant it. He never said things on the range he didn't mean, force of habit from 11 years of knowing that words like rounds needed to land exactly where intended. Not because of the record, because of how you shot. The patience, the calculation, he paused looking for the right word, the respect for the distance. Sarah looked up. He used to say that the distance between you and the target isn't empty, it's full of variables, full of physics, full of time. You have to respect what's in the space, not just focus on the endpoint. He picked up his coffee. I've quoted that probably as often as the one about fear. She smiled. It was the first full smile he'd seen from her, and it was unmistakably her father's. The same shape, the same slight asymmetry, the same quality of being just a little more genuine than a smile usually manages to be. He sounds like he was worth missing, she said quietly. He was. The word landed between them and stayed there. Not heavy exactly, but present. The way important things are present, not demanding acknowledgement, just refusing to be invisible. Outside, a wind flag on the range shifted. A radio on the wall crackled, not Donovan's but the building's general frequency, a sound that had been background noise his entire adult life. He almost ignored it. Then the voice on the other end said, Commander Donovan, this is Admiral Reeves. I need you to report to the secure briefing room immediately. There's a CIA operative here. Donovan set down his coffee. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the radio. His 11 years of relatively quiet competence, the range, the trainees, the known problems with knowable solutions made a sound like a door swinging shut behind him. Excuse me, he said. He was halfway to the door when the voice on the radio said one more thing. Sir, tell the Mitchell girl she should come too. He stopped. He turned and looked at Sarah. She had heard it. Her face had gone very still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about the shape of this particular day. She stood up. I guess the destination found me, she said. The secure briefing room at Coronado smelled like recycled air and bad decisions. Donovan had been in rooms like this before too many times to count, not enough times to get comfortable with what usually came out of them. A rectangular table, 4 chairs, a projector screen that someone had already pulled down, and standing at the far end, arms crossed, posture radiating the particular tension of someone who had not slept in approximately 40 hours was a woman in a charcoal blazer who introduced herself as Patricia Morgan, CIA. She was maybe 45, sharp-faced, dark-eyed, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm but from discipline, the learned containment of someone who dealt in information that could get people killed and had trained herself not to leak any of it through her body language. She looked at Donovan when he walked in. Then she looked at Sarah. She didn't look surprised to see either of them. That Donovan noted was itself a piece of information. Admiral Reeves, silver-haired, 68, the kind of man who had been giving orders so long that his voice had settled into a permanent register of authority, gestured to the chairs. Sit down, both of you. He looked at Sarah specifically. I know this is unusual, Miss Mitchell. Bear with us. Sarah sat. She folded her hands on the table and waited. She was good at waiting. Donovan had noticed that about her in the range. The quality of her patience was different from other people's. Most people wait with visible effort like they're holding something back. She waited like waiting was just another form of preparation. Morgan clicked the projector remote. A photograph appeared on the screen. A man somewhere between 50 and 60, heavy built with a beard going gray at the edges and eyes that sat too close together under a heavy brow. He was photographed from a distance telephoto lens, the kind of shot that got taken without the subject's knowledge. He was standing outside a stone building, talking to 2 other men, one hand raised in what might have been emphasis or might have been a threat. With some people, the difference was purely contextual. Zahir Khan Valsar, Morgan said, warlord, operates primarily out of the Kunar province in northeastern Afghanistan. Former Taliban affiliate who went independent in 2009, when he decided the organization's leadership was in his assessment insufficiently profitable. She said the last 2 words without any inflection whatsoever, which somehow made them worse. He controls a territory roughly the size of Rhode Island, through a combination of extortion, opium revenue, and the kind of violence that discourages people from asking questions. Donovan studied the photograph. He'd heard the name. Most people who'd been paying attention to that region for the past 15 years had heard the name. Hearing a name and seeing a face were different things. He's holding two hostages, Morgan continued. An agricultural NGO worker named Daniel Cho, South Korean national, taken 8 days ago. And she clicked to the next photograph. Michael Torres, former Navy SEAL, retired 2019. He was working private security for the NGO when the abduction occurred. Donovan sat forward. Torres, he knew that name too. Not well, Torres had come up through a different team, different era, but he knew the name. The way you know the names of people in your community even when you haven't met them personally. The community was small enough that reputations traveled. Khan released a video 41 hours ago, Morgan said. Execution announcement. He's given a deadline of, she checked her watch, 31 hours from right now, after which he stated his intention to kill both hostages publicly on camera. She clicked to a third image, a still frame from the video. Torres kneeling on a dirt floor, wrist-bound, blood dried on the left side of his face. His jaw was set, even in the still frame, even in that position. He looked like a man who was doing the calculus on every possible option and hadn't stopped yet. There will be no ransom negotiation. Khan has been explicit. This is performance. He wants the visibility. The room was quiet for a moment. Donovan said, "What's the ask?" Morgan looked at him directly. "We have eyes on the compound. We have a location confirmed 26 hours ago, reconfirmed 6 hours ago via satellite. The compound sits in a valley in the Kunar Mountains, surrounded by high ridgeline on 3 sides. The only viable approach for any kind of conventional extraction, force triggers sensors at approximately 4 kilometers out. Khan built his position specifically to be extraction resistant. He's had people try before." A pause. "They didn't get in, and the hostages didn't get out. What about air?" "The valley geometry makes it impossible. Rotary wing comes in low, they hear it 40 minutes before it arrives. Fixed wing, even a precision strike, risks the hostage building. They're in the same structure as Khan's primary living quarters. It's intentional." Morgan uncrossed her arms. "Which brings us to why you're here, Commander, and why," she looked at Sarah, "she's here." Sarah had been sitting perfectly still through the entire briefing. Her hands were still folded on the table. Her face gave away nothing. But her eyes, Donovan caught it. Her eyes had moved to the photograph of Torres the moment it appeared and had not fully left it since. "There is a ridge line," Morgan said. "On the north side of the valley. It overlooks Khan's compound at a distance of approximately 2,800 yards. Possibly more depending on the specific firing position available." She let that number sit in the air for exactly the right amount of time. "We had a team assess the feasibility of a long-range precision solution 18 months ago. Their conclusion was that the shot was theoretically possible, but operationally unrealistic. No active duty asset we had available at that time could reliably make that shot under field conditions at altitude with wind variables and mountain terrain." Donovan said nothing. Morgan looked at Sarah. "This morning's range session was observed." Sarah blinked, one slow blink. "You were watching." "We were watching." Donovan pushed his chair back slightly. "Patricia, she's a civilian. She broke your range record, Commander, by over 100 yards, under observation conditions that, while not combat, were not exactly controlled either." Morgan's voice didn't change a register. "We're not asking her to breach the compound. We're not asking her to run an op. We're asking her to make a shot." "You're asking her to kill someone," Donovan said flatly. "I'm asking her to save 2 people, Morgan said, just as flatly. "Khan will be in a predictable location at a predictable time. We have intelligence on his routine that is current within 6 hours. There is a window. It is 31 hours wide and closing." She looked at Sarah again. "The question is whether she's willing." Sarah said, "Tell me about my father." Morgan didn't miss a beat. "Thomas Mitchell, SEAL Team 3, killed in action, October 3rd, 1993, Mogadishu. He was part of the task force engaged in the operation that later became known as the Battle of Black Sea." She paused. "What you don't know what was classified for 19 years is that Zahir Khan was present in Mogadishu in 1993. He was 22 years old, working as a runner for a Somali militia faction that had operational ties to Aidid's organization. He was not the man who fired the rounds that killed your father. but he was the man who called in the ambush position that pinned your father's unit in the first place. A silence that had weight. The ambush that Thomas Mitchell died covering the withdrawal from. The room went somewhere else entirely. Donovan watched Sarah's face. He watched the information arrive. He watched her process it, not with visible emotion, not with the dramatic reaction. The moment almost seemed to demand, but with the quiet, thorough absorption of someone filing information into a system that had been built to receive exactly this kind of weight. Her jaw tightened once, her hands still folded on the table pressed together slightly harder. That was all. "You've known this for how long?" she asked. Her voice was level. "The connection was confirmed 8 years ago," Morgan said. "The classification was maintained because Khan became an intelligence asset for a period after 2003. He provided information on Taliban movement in exchange for protection. That arrangement ended in 2011. Since then, he's been on a list." A pause. "Today, he moved to the top of it." Sarah was quiet for 15 seconds. Donovan counted them. Then she said, "When do we leave?" Donovan said, "Sarah, when do we leave?" she repeated, not louder, just final. Donovan looked at Morgan. Morgan looked at him with the expression of someone who already knew what the answer was going to be and had simply been waiting for the people in the room to arrive at it themselves. He stood up, walked to the projector screen, looked at the photograph of the compound from altitude, the satellite image showing the valley, the ridgeline, the tiny cluster of buildings that contained 2 men waiting on a deadline. He did the geometry in his head. He'd been doing geometry like this his whole adult life. Range, elevation, approach routes, wind patterns and mountain terrain. The particular problems that came with shooting downward at steep angles, which changed bullet behavior in ways that punished the unprepared. He thought about Ghost Mitchell, 29 years old, keeping a rifle on a street in Mogadishu while his teammate got clear. I thought about Sarah Mitchell, 26 or 27 or however old she was, hitting a target at 2851 yards on a California morning with the first real smile he'd seen her make. He said, "I'm going with her." Morgan said, "Commander, you're 62. I'm aware of my age, Patricia. I am going with her." He turned from the screen. "She's not going into the mountains of Afghanistan with a CIA team she's never met to make a shot she's never made under conditions she's never trained for without someone who knows her shooting. That's not a negotiation. That's a condition." Morgan studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the efficiency of someone filing a piece of information that complicated her plan but didn't break it. "We leave in 4 hours. There's a transport at North Island. I'll brief you on the team in the air." She picked up her materials, walked toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Miss Mitchell," she said without turning around, "for what it's worth, your father was a name in our files for a long time. Today he's a reason." She left. The door closed. Donovan and Sarah were alone in the briefing room. The projector still hummed. The satellite image of the compound still sat on the screen. Small buildings in a mountain valley, impossibly far from a California training range, impossibly close to the next 31 hours of both their lives. Sarah stood up. She looked at the screen for a long moment. 800 yards, she said. Mountain terrain, altitude, wind. She said it like she was reading items off a list, like she was already calculating. "What's the elevation of the ridgeline?" "Probably 10 to 12,000 feet, Donovan said. "Thinner air changes your ballistics. Less drag. Bullet runs faster and flatter than you're used to. You'll need to dial down." "By how much?" "Depends on exact altitude. We'll calculate on site." He paused. "Have you ever shot above 8,000 feet? 7.5 New Mexico, 2 summers ago. It's not the same." "I know." She met his eyes. "Nothing about this is the same." "A beat. That's fine." He looked at her for a moment. At Ghost Mitchell's daughter, standing in a secure briefing room at Coronado 31 years after her father died, buying 60 seconds for a teammate to get clear, getting ready to walk into the same darkness, wearing the same quiet determination that apparently ran in the blood of the Mitchell family, like something structural, like load-bearing material. "You should call someone," he said. "Someone who knows where you're going, in case." "There's no one to call," she said simply. Not sad, just accurate. "My mom's gone. There's no one else." She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. "I'll meet you at the transport." She walked out. Donovan stood in the empty briefing room for 90 seconds, which was approximately 89 seconds longer than he normally allowed himself to stand still. Then he took out his phone and called Okafor. Master Chief? Sir. Okafor's voice was careful. He'd seen the CIA operative arrive. He wasn't a man who missed things. How bad? Bad enough. Donovan moved toward the door. Hold the range schedule for the week. Tell the trainees the advanced course is postponed due. He thought about it. Tell them equipment issues. And if someone asks where you are, Donovan opened the door. The California afternoon was out there, bright and ordinary, completely unaware of what was being set in motion inside this building. Tell them I'm dealing with unfinished business, he said. He ended the call. He allowed himself exactly one more moment, to think about Ghost Mitchell in Mogadishu, about the last words Ghost had said to him, about the particular shape of a debt that didn't expire because the creditor was dead. Some obligations Donovan had learned across 62 years of living don't answer to the calendar. They answer to something older and more stubborn than time. Then he moved. 4 hours went fast when they needed to. The transport out of North Island was a C-17, and it was already loaded and waiting when Donovan and Sarah arrived. Morgan was there standing near the rear ramp with a man Donovan recognized from 3 separate operations in the 2000s, a former Delta operator named Garrett Briggs. Mid-40s, built like a question you didn't want to answer, with the flat, economical movements of someone who had spent so much time in violent situations that violence had simply become a grammar. He spoke rather than a language he performed. He nodded at Donovan, looked at Sarah once quickly with a professional's assessment eye, and then looked somewhere else. There were 3 other men already aboard Tactical Quiet, the kind of people who arrived in places without appearing to have traveled. Donovan didn't ask their names. They didn't offer them. Morgan handed both Donovan and Sarah files. Physical files, paper, the kind that would be collected and shredded before anyone landed. Read in the air. Memorize what matters. The compound layout, the guard rotation schedule, the timing window. Sarah opened her file, immediately settling into a jump seat with the focused calm of a student who'd been told the exam was in 4 hours and planned to use every minute of it. Donovan sat across from her. He opened his own file. He watched her over the top of the pages as she read, watched the particular quality of her concentration, the way her eyes moved through information and her lips moved slightly. Not reading aloud, but filing and coding, building the internal model that any precision shot required long before the rifle came out of the case. He'd seen that behavior in exactly 2 other people in his life. One of them was Carlos Hathcock's protégés, who he'd cross-trained with briefly in 1988. The other was Ghost Mitchell. The C-17's engines climbed toward takeoff power. The ramp came up, the California coast disappeared behind them, and the world narrowed down to the contents of a paper file, a 31-hour countdown, and the distance between a mountain ridgeline and a man who had been on the wrong side of history for 31 years without ever paying for it. Briggs leaned across from his seat and spoke to Donovan low enough that only he could hear. Is she ready for this honest answer? Donovan looked at Sarah. She had turned a page and was now making small notations in the margin with a pencil she'd produced from somewhere, the same habit he realized with a jolt as the notebook, the same compact, meticulous handwriting. She's been ready for this her whole life, Donovan said. She just didn't know the target yet. Briggs considered that, nodded. Long way from the range. Yeah, Donovan looked back at his own file, at the satellite image, at the compound in the valley and the ridgeline above it, and the distance between the two that was going to require everything Sarah Mitchell had been building toward since age 9. Long way from a lot of things. At 30,000 feet over the Pacific, the file told him what he needed to know. Khan's routine placed him in the compound's central courtyard every evening at approximately 1900 local time, a habit, almost a ritual that the intelligence summary described as deliberate and theatrical. He liked to be seen by his men, liked to walk the perimeter of his own compound with the unhurried stride of a man who believed himself permanent. The window for the shot was approximately 4 minutes. The distance was 251 yards minimum, possibly more depending on where the shooting position could be established on the ridgeline. The elevation differential, shooting steeply downward into the valley, would require calculations that had to be done on site because the exact angle wasn't confirmed. Shooting downhill at significant angles was one of the most common sources of miss at extreme range. Gravity's effect on the bullet changes with the angle of the shot, and if you ran the standard numbers without accounting for it, you'd hit high every time. Donovan folded the file in his lap and looked at the ceiling of the C-17. He thought about a 29-year-old man in Mogadishu who had looked at an impossible situation and made a decision in about 4 seconds. He thought about what it cost. He thought about the debt that decision created, not a debt Ghost had ever intended to create, not a burden he had meant to leave, but a weight that had settled on Donovan's chest that October day and had never entirely lifted. 31 years. He looked at Sarah. She was still reading, still annotating, still building her model. She looked up once, caught his eye, and held it for a moment. "I'm going to make it," she said quietly. Not bragging, not seeking reassurance, just stating it. The way you state a measurement you've already taken. "I know," Donovan said. She went back to the file. The aircraft crossed the coastline and headed west into the dark. They landed at Bagram on a Thursday morning that felt like the inside of a held breath. The air hit different at altitude, thinner, drier, with a cold edge that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the mountains pressing in from every direction. Sarah stepped off the ramp and took one slow breath, consciously, the way you check a new variable before committing it to your calculations. Her body would need to adjust. She gave it exactly the time it needed and not a second more. Briggs had a vehicle waiting. 2 vehicles, actually dusty Land Cruisers with no markings, the kind of transportation that existed specifically to not exist. He moved them through the base with the efficiency of a man who had done this particular type of departure from this particular type of place, enough times that it had become a practiced choreography. No wasted motion, no explanation, just movement. Morgan rode in the lead vehicle. Donovan and Sarah were in the second with a quiet man named Reyes who handled communications and said approximately 14 words during the entire drive. The road out of Bagram climbed almost immediately, switchbacking up into terrain that didn't apologize for itself, rock and scrub, and the kind of elevation change that made your ears pop and your lungs recalibrate. Donovan watched Sarah from the corner of his eye. She was looking out the window, but not at the view. She was looking at the ridge lines. He recognized the behavior. She was doing fieldwork with her eyes, reading terrain, the way a musician reads a new score, not performing, yet just understanding the key signature, finding where the hard parts were going to be. "Wind patterns in mountain terrain are different from anything you've practiced," he said. "Valley floor wind and ridgeline wind can be completely opposite directions. You'll read one set of flags at your position, and the target will be sitting in an entirely different air column. How do you compensate? Experience mostly. You look for indicators at multiple points between you and the target. Dust movement, vegetation, smoke if there is any." He paused. "And you build in margin for the variables you can't read." She turned from the window. "Meaning I aim for something other than center mass. Meaning you identify a target that gives you the result you need, even if the wind moves the round 3 to 5 inches off your intended point of impact." He held her gaze. "Khan is going to be near the propane supply on the east side of the compound. Morgan's intelligence puts 2 large tanks there used for cooking and heating. A hit on either tank. Chain reaction," Sarah said. She'd read that part of the file. He could see it behind her eyes, the calculation already running. Blast radius sufficient to eliminate anyone within 30 feet. The hostages are in the north building, 42 yards from the tanks. "That's close." "That's the margin," he said. 42 yards between what works and what we can't take back." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You've made calls like that before. In the field. Decisions where the margin was that tight." "Yes." "How do you—" She stopped. "Started differently. How do you carry it afterward if the margin isn't enough?" Donovan looked at his hands for a moment. 62 years of use had left their record on them, scars he could name and scars he'd forgotten the stories behind. "You don't carry it," he said. "It carries you. You just decide what kind of passenger you're going to be." A pause. "Your father understood that. Better than most." She absorbed that, filed it, didn't respond to it directly because some things you receive rather than answer. The vehicle climbed. They reached the forward staging point at 1340 local time. A small, fortified position cut into a rock face manned by 6 people Donovan didn't recognize and wasn't meant to. Morgan briefed them in a room barely large enough for the 8 people standing in it, her voice low and completely without drama, which somehow made everything she said hit harder. "Current intelligence confirms Khan is on schedule," she said. "His pattern has held for 11 consecutive days. At 1900 local, he walks the east perimeter of the compound. He spends between 3 and 7 minutes in the vicinity of the propane storage. He does this every evening without variation because he believes his position is impenetrable and therefore he has no reason to vary his routine. She looked around the room. That belief is about to become his most significant tactical error. Briggs said, guard rotation. 4 exterior guards at all times. Rotation happens at 1830 and 2000. The 1900 window falls in the middle of a rotation cycle, which means the guards on duty at that time have been on post for 90 minutes. Attention degrades. That's our window. She looked at Donovan. Team moves to the ridge line at 2200 tonight. 6 hours of darkness to cover the approach. Sarah shoots at 1900 tomorrow. Donovan calculated the timeline. 17 hours on the ridge. Approximately. The approach takes 4 to 6 hours depending on conditions. Morgan's eyes moved to Sarah. How are you feeling? It was the first time Morgan had asked anyone how they were feeling. Donovan noticed it. Sarah noticed it too. He could tell by the slight recalibration in her expression. I need to sight the rifle at this altitude before we move, Sarah said. At least 50 rounds. The ballistics are different up here, and I need to know by how much before I'm lying on a ridge line with one shot. Morgan nodded. There's a range position 200 meters north. You have 2 hours. Sarah looked at Donovan. He nodded once. She picked up her jacket and walked out. Morgan waited until she was gone. Then she looked at Donovan with an expression that had finally for the first time dropped some of its professional insulation. She's 26 years old, Jack. He didn't react to the first name. He and Morgan had a history that predated her CIA tenure. By several years, they'd crossed operational paths twice in the late 90s. She knew she could use it when the bureaucracy needed to step back. She's 26 years old with 17 years of dedicated training, he said. She broke a 40-year record this morning. She's read that compound file 3 times since we boarded the aircraft, and she has a reason that goes to the bone. He met Morgan's eyes. I've sent younger people into harder situations with less preparation and more uncertainty. You have too. Morgan was quiet for a moment. If she misses, she won't. If she does, then we go to contingency. He stood up, but she won't. He went to find the range position. Sarah was already there, already behind the rifle, already making adjustments with the methodical focus of someone who had entered a private frequency that the rest of the world couldn't quite tune into. She'd fired 8 rounds by the time Donovan arrived and was already annotating in the worn notebook, the same notebook from Coronado, the one she'd carried in her jacket pocket across 12 time zones without apparently giving it a second thought. It's running flat, she said without looking up. At this altitude, thinner air, the bullet is losing less velocity over distance. I'm hitting consistently high at the equivalent ranges. How much high? 6 inches at 800 yards. Extrapolating out, that means at 2 to 800 yards, I'm looking at a significant correction. I'm working through the math now. He crouched beside her, looked at the notebook. The numbers were dense layered cross-referenced with altitude tables she'd apparently memorized because the notebook's tables only went so far. What's your drop correction at 2,800 equivalent? She showed him the calculation. He checked it against his own mental model, not because he doubted her arithmetic, but because 2 sets of eyes on a number this important was always the right call. He found one variable she'd estimated conservatively and pointed to it. She looked at it for 3 seconds, nodded, and revised it. The revision moved the correction by a quarter MOA. That matters, he said. I know. She dialed the new correction into the scope, settled back into position, fired, checked the result through her own scope, fired again. They worked for 90 minutes. She shot 54 rounds total. By the end, she had a complete corrected firing solution for the altitude documented and cross-checked with margin notes for wind variables specific to the mountain terrain. It was the most thorough pre-operation preparation Donovan had seen from any shooter active duty or otherwise in 11 years of training. Okay, she said finally. She sat back, rolled her shoulders once. Okay. Okay meaning you're ready, or okay meaning you're processing both. She looked at the mountains in the direction of the valley, the direction they'd be moving tonight. Can I ask you something? Yes. Mogadishu, October 3rd. She said the date like it was a place. Were you with him at the end? Donovan had known this question was coming since the moment she'd walked through the gate at Coronado. He'd been preparing an answer for 31 years, which meant he'd been preparing nothing at all because There was no answer you could prepare for something like this. There was only the truth which arrived raw every time, regardless of how many times you'd handled it. Yes, he said. She waited. We were in a building off the Target Street. 3 Rangers were pinned down in the intersection, couldn't move, couldn't get cover, taking fire from 2 elevated positions. Ghost. He stopped. Found the next part. Ghost moved to the window and started working the elevated positions. Took out the first one in 2 shots. Second one took longer. He was exposed for about 90 seconds. Donovan looked at his hands. He took 3 rounds. First 2 he didn't acknowledge, just kept shooting. The third one put him down. Sarah's hands were still in her lap. She was very quiet. He looked at me, Donovan said, and he said, another stop. The weight of the words had not decreased across 3 decades. If anything, they had accumulated interest. Get out, Jack. I bought you a minute. Don't waste it. He cleared his throat. So I got out, and the Rangers got out, and I have thought about that minute every day since. Sarah's voice, when it came, was barely above even. He never wasted words, did he? Not one. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, he would have liked you. I mean, he clearly did, but I think he would have liked who you became. She looked at Donovan directly. You kept training snipers for 30 years. How many of those people are alive today because of what he taught you? Donovan had never framed it that way. The thought landed somewhere unexpected, not in the guilt which was its usual address, but somewhere adjacent to it. Something that wasn't quite peace, but was in the same neighborhood. I don't know, he said honestly. I think that's the point, she said. She stood up, picked up the rifle. Let's get ready to move. They began the approach at 2200 under a sky that was absolutely extravagant with stars, the kind of sky you only get at altitude far from city light, where the universe stops being an abstraction and becomes something you can almost reach. Donovan noted it and then stopped noting it because the terrain underfoot required full attention, and sentiment was a luxury with a cost he wasn't willing to pay. Briggs led. Sarah moved third in the column behind Reyes. Donovan was fourth. 2 of the unnamed tactical men covered the rear. They moved in silence. That was not the silence of people being quiet, but the silence of people who had trained that specific skill, foot placement, breath control, the suppression of every non-essential sound until it became automatic. The first hour of the approach was the steepest. The ridge climbed fast, and the footing was loose in places. Scree slopes that wanted to betray you. Rock faces that required 3 points of contact and trust. Sarah moved through it with an economy that Donovan respected. She didn't fight the terrain, she read it and adapted. The rifle was slung across her back, and she moved with the awareness of someone who knew that the equipment mattered and protected it accordingly, but didn't let protecting it prevent her from moving properly. At the 2-hour mark, Briggs called a halt. He crouched, brought the team in close, spoke in the register just above a whisper. Thermal picked up movement on the southeast slope. 2 individuals moving north. Could be locals, could be Khan's outer perimeter. Donovan looked at the thermal monocular Briggs handed him. 2 heat signatures approximately 600 meters away, moving at a walking pace. Not tactical movement, no bounding, no covering positions, just walking. Shepherds, Reyes said. At 0055 hours, Briggs said. Nobody answered that. They waited 17 minutes completely motionless in the dark, while the 2 signatures moved across the slope and eventually disappeared behind a ridgeline. Donovan watched Sarah during the wait. She was on one knee, the rifle butt resting on the rock beside her, her head slightly tilted in the listening posture of someone cataloging every sound. Not nervous, calibrated. When Briggs signaled movement, she rose and moved without hesitation. At the 4-hour mark, something happened that wasn't in any briefing document. Reyes, moving through a narrow rock passage, caught his boot on an unseen ledge and went down hard. The sound was not loud. He'd trained to fall quietly, which was itself a learned skill. But in the stillness of the mountain night, the scrape of his knee against rock and the involuntary sharp exhale carried further than any of them wanted. Briggs froze. Everyone froze. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing moved below them. Reyes stood. His knee was wrong, not broken, but the way he weighted it when he rose told Donovan everything. He'd twisted it on the fall and was now running at diminished capacity. Briggs looked at Donovan. Donovan looked at Reyes. Reyes said very quietly, I'm fine. I was not fine. He was functional, which was a different thing, and in this context, functional was sufficient. He adjusted his stride and kept moving, and nobody said anything else about it. because that was the grammar of this particular situation. But it changed the geometry. Reyes was their primary communications operator. If he was compromised, their ability to coordinate with Morgan at the staging point was diminished, which meant Sarah's shot was no longer the only single point of failure in the mission. Now there were two. Donovan moved up beside Sarah at the next rest point, spoke against her ear. Reyes is down 20%. If something goes wrong after you shoot, our comms are slower than planned. She processed this without visible reaction, meaning I need to be right the first time and we need to move immediately after. Yes, that was already the plan, she said. Now it's the plan without a margin. She looked at him in the dark with starlight and nothing else. Her face was mostly shadow, but he could see her eyes and they were steady in the way that things are steady when they have been tested enough that unsteadiness is no longer an available option. Donovan, she said quietly, I've been preparing for a shot my whole life, whether I knew the specific target or not. A pause. I don't need a margin. I need the shot. He nodded. They kept moving. They reached the ridge line position at 0347. 4 hours and 47 minutes of approach, which was within the planned window. Briggs identified the firing position, a natural rock formation that provided stable support cover from the flanks and a clear line of sight into the valley below, and marked it without ceremony. This was where it would happen, in approximately 15 hours. Sarah crawled to the edge and looked down into the valley for the first time. The compound was dark, small from this distance, the buildings reduced to geometric shapes, the courtyard a pale rectangle. The propane tanks were invisible in the dark, but she knew where they were from the satellite imagery. She had the compound memorized the way you memorize the layout of a room you've lived in for years. Every measurement, every relationship between structures. She pulled back from the edge and settled into the firing position. Lay behind the rifle. Check the position, bipod angle, natural point of aim, the geometry of her body in relation to the bore axis. She made 2 small adjustments. Then she was still. Comfortable, Donovan asked. No, she said, but correct. He set up the spotting scope 18 inches to her right angled so he could read the same valley she was looking at without being in her way. Briggs and the 2 tactical men established a perimeter back from the edge positioned to respond if anyone came up the ridge from below. Reyes found a flat rock and sat on it, extended his damaged knee, and began the quiet work of maintaining their communications link with the staging point. And then they waited. 15 hours is a long time to wait on a mountain with a rifle. Donovan had done it before in different mountains in different decades with different stakes. The waiting was its own discipline, its own form of work. Your body wanted to move. Your mind wanted to plan and replay and second guess. The skill was in redirecting, both keeping the body still without letting it stiffen, keeping the mind engaged without letting it spiral. Sarah was extraordinary at it. She lay behind the rifle and she was, for all practical purposes, simply there. Not restless, not sleeping, just present in the specific focused way of someone who had learned across 17 years of training that the waiting and the shooting were the same act, that the patience was not separate from the precision, that you couldn't be one without the other. Around Mo 600, as the sky began to shift toward gray, she said quietly, "Tell me something else about him." Donovan was sitting against the rock face behind her, 3 feet back, his spotter's scope within reach. Like what? Something small, something that isn't about the mission or the war. She paused. Something that was just him. Donovan thought for a moment. He could not whistle, he said. Tried his entire life. He'd attempted, and what came out was, he shook his head. It was genuinely terrible, like a screen door with a mechanical problem. He thought it was hilarious. Sarah made a sound that might have been a laugh, brief and quiet. That's very specific. I'm remembering the time he tried to signal a cab in New York with a whistle, and the cab driver rolled down his window and said, "Sir, are you having a medical emergency?" This time she actually laughed. Quiet, brief, real. He sounds ridiculous. How was frequently ridiculous, Donovan said. It was one of his most important qualities. He paused. The best operators I've ever known all had something like that, some capacity for being genuinely, wholeheartedly absurd. I think it's connected. The people who can be completely unguarded in a light moment are the same people who can be completely locked in when the moment requires it. It's the same openness, just pointed in different directions. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I can't whistle either, she said finally. Never could. Donovan said nothing. He just let that sit there in the mountain air between them, small and exact, and somehow carrying more weight than anything else that had been said since California. The sky continued to lighten. Below them, the compound began to show its first signs of life, smoke from a cooking fire, a single figure crossing the courtyard. Donovan watched it all through the spotting scope and filed what he saw, and beside him, Sarah Mitchell lay behind the Barrett and watched the same things through an entirely different kind of patience, and the mountain held them both. And somewhere below them, two men were counting down the hours of a deadline that was about to run out of time. At 0847, Reyes looked up from his communication setup and caught Donovan's eye. Sir, he said quietly, Morgan says we have a problem. Donovan moved to him in 3 steps. Reyes handed over the radio transcript. Morgan's handwriting relayed through the signal chain. Donovan read it once fast, then he read it again because he needed the second reading to fully accept what the first one had told him. Khan had moved the execution timeline, not by hours, by half a day. New intelligence received 40 minutes ago indicated Khan had received word of increased military activity in the region, not their operation specifically, but enough ambient signal to make him cautious. He was moving the execution to 1300 local, not 1900, which meant the window was not 15 hours away. It was 4 hours and 11 minutes away. And the shot at 1300 in full daylight, with the sun at its worst angle for mirage and heat shimmer, would be significantly harder than the 1900 shot they had planned for. Donovan looked at his watch. Then he looked at Sarah. She hadn't moved. She was still behind the rifle, still in position, still in that particular quality of stillness that was its own kind of readiness. She hadn't heard the exchange. He could tell her in 60 seconds. He would tell her in 60 seconds. I took the 60 seconds first for himself, the private calculus of a man who had been in positions like this before and knew that the next words he said would change what came after them. Then he walked to her position and crouched beside her. The timeline moved, he said. We shoot at 1300. She turned her head and looked at him. 4 hours, she said. 4 hours and 9 minutes. She turned back to the scope. A breath in, a breath out. Then we should check the wind flags, she said. Sun's going to create thermals once it gets high. The valley will draft differently than it does at dusk. He looked at her for one moment. You understand, this changes the shot conditions significantly. I understand. Her voice was even. Get me the wind data. He stood up. He went to work. Below them, the compound was waking up, unaware that the ridgeline above it had just shifted into a different gear entirely. And Sarah Mitchell pressed her cheek against the stock of the Barrett and began the last 4 hours of a 17-year preparation in a mountain range on the other side of the world from her father's grave, with the sun climbing toward its worst possible angle in a margin that had just gotten significantly thinner. She did not adjust her breathing. She did not adjust her position. She just waited the way she had always waited, because the waiting and the shooting were the same act, and she had never, not once in 17 years, been anything other than ready. 4 hours and 9 minutes. Donovan moved fast. He went to Briggs first because Briggs was the kind of man who received bad news the way a good structure receives weight. It didn't buckle, it redistributed. He laid out the timeline change in 30 seconds flat. Briggs listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Donovan had always respected about operators of that caliber. They didn't waste time reacting to information. They just absorbed it and moved to the next problem. 1300 means full sun, Briggs said. Mirage will be significant at that range. I know. Can she read Mirage at 2800 yards? She's going to have to. Donovan moved back toward the firing position. Get your people repositioned. If we draw attention after the shot, I want us moving inside 90 seconds. Briggs was already moving before Donovan finished the sentence. Reyes was working the radio, relaying the updated timeline back to Morgan at the staging point, his damaged knee extended in front of him, his face carrying the particular focused blankness of someone who had decided that pain was simply not relevant to the current situation. Donovan put a hand on his shoulder briefly as he passed, not to comfort, just to acknowledge. Reyes nodded without looking up. Sarah had not moved from behind the rifle. Donovan settled into a spotter position and picked up the scope. The valley below was fully awake now, 0900, and the compound was showing activity. 2 guards visible on the exterior, Smoke from two locations. A vehicle parked near the south entrance that hadn't been there at first light. He cataloged everything, cross-referenced it against the compound layout he'd memorized on the aircraft. The vehicle was new. New variables this close to execution time were not welcome, but they weren't disqualifying. Talk to me about the Mirage, he said to Sarah. It's going to build as the sun gets higher, she said. Her voice was the same as it had been all night, level-specific, calibrated. She hadn't slept. He knew that because he hadn't slept either, and she'd been within his awareness the entire time. But she didn't sound like someone running on empty. She sounded like someone running on something else entirely, a fuel source that didn't come from rest. At this range, a full Mirage condition can move the apparent target image by 6 to 8 inches. If I read it wrong, I'm 6 to 8 inches off my intended point of impact, which at the propane tanks means I need to know exactly which direction the Mirage is boiling, she said. If it's running left to right, the bullet will actually be displaced right. If it's vertical, the round will be slightly high. She paused. I need you reading the Mirage and calling it to me every 60 seconds from 1200 onward. Understood. He adjusted the spotting scope's focus, slightly dialing it for the intermediate range, where Mirage would be most visible. What else? The thermal columns in the valley. She shifted her weight minimally, resettling a hip that had been in contact with rock for 5 hours. When the valley floor heats up, thermals rise. At 800 yards, there's enough air column for a thermal to push the bullet offline during the last 500 yards of flight. It's the part of the trajectory I can't fully calculate because I can't see what the air is doing at the target end. You'll see dust movement near the compound, vegetation if there is any. Khan's men move between structures, watch for how smoke from the cooking fires drifts once the thermals establish. She was quiet for a moment. Then you've done this before, spotted for a shot in these conditions. Similar conditions, different mountains. He kept his eye on the scope. 2004, a shot at just under 200 yards, midday sun, Hindu Kush. He paused. The shooter was a gunnery sergeant named Phillips. He made it. We got out. What was the margin? Small enough that I didn't sleep for 2 days after. He moved the scope to the eastern sector of the compound. The propane tanks were visible now in the daylight, 2 cylinders against the compound wall, larger than the satellite image had suggested. That was good. A larger target within the intended blast radius. The margin tomorrow will be larger. Today, she corrected. The margin today will be larger. He almost smiled. Today. At 1000 hours, something shifted in the compound that tightened everything by a full degree. Donovan caught it in the scope, a change in the guard pattern. Instead of the standard 4 exterior positions, he was now counting 6. 2 additional guards had appeared stationed at the north entrance near the hostage building. He watched the new positions for 4 minutes, tracking their movement patterns, checking intervals. He said guard count just went to 6, 2 new positions on the north. Sarah said Khan's nervous. Possibly, or it's a routine adjustment. But he didn't believe that, and his voice said so. It means more eyes on the courtyard during the window. If any of them are looking the right direction at the right moment, they won't see anything. The shot's suppressed. The blast from the tanks won't be. She processed that. How fast do we need to move after? Immediately, Briggs, he raised his voice slightly. Briggs appeared from his perimeter position. Heard it. I'm moving Caldwell to the south approach. If anyone comes up the ridge after the shot, they'll hit him first. A pause. We're still good. Tight but good. Tight but good, Sarah repeated quietly to herself. Not sarcastically, just filing it, accepting the parameters. At 145, Reyes caught Donovan's attention with 2 taps on the ground. Signal for incoming transmission. Donovan moved to him and took the handset. Morgan's voice slightly compressed by the encryption, but clear enough. Jack, we have a complication. He waited. The NGO worker Cho, his government, has been making noise through diplomatic channels for the last 6 hours. South Korean intelligence believes they've identified the compound location independently. There's a possibility they attempt their own extraction before 1300. Donovan closed his eyes for 1 second. If a Korean extraction team hits that valley before our shot, Khan executes immediately, both hostages. He said publicly he'll kill them at the first sign of any military approach. Morgan's voice was tight. We've been in contact with Seoul, but they're not confirming or denying any operation. We have maybe 2 hours of certainty, and then the picture gets unclear. So we move the shot. To what time? Donovan looked at his watch, 1:10:47. He looked at the valley. He looked at the sun position already high enough to be creating the beginning of shimmer at the intermediate ranges. He looked at Sarah, who had not moved and could not hear the radio, but was watching him from the corner of her eye with the focused attention of someone who understood that the conversation happening 3 feet away was about her shot. 11:45, he said. We take the shot at 11:45. Silence on the radio for 4 seconds. Then that's less than an hour from now. I know what it is, Patricia. Another pause. The Mirage at 11:45 will be manageable, barely, but manageable. He looked at Sarah. Tell Seoul to hold. Give us until noon. If the shot goes clean, there's nothing left for their extraction team to extract. Morgan said if it doesn't go clean, it will. He said it the way Sarah had said it earlier. Not as bravado, as a measurement already taken. Confirm the new window. Confirmed, noon is your hard deadline, Jack. After noon, I can't hold Seoul and I can't hold the clock. He handed the radio back to Reyes, walked directly to Sarah's position. Crouched beside her. She read his face before he said a word. How much time? 58 minutes. We shoot at 11:45. He watched her receive it. He watched her run the internal calculation 58 minutes to adjust everything, and she'd spent 4 hours preparing for the 1300 window. The Mirage conditions at 11:45 versus 1300. The sun angle, the thermal development state, all of it different, all of it requiring revision. She said the Mirage at 11:45 will be running but not fully established. That's actually more dangerous than a full Mirage. A full Mirage I can read. A building Mirage is inconsistent. I know. You're going to have to call it in real time, not just every 60 seconds, continuously from setup to shot. I know. And the thermals in the valley will be early stage, rising from the floor but not fully columnar. The smoke from the cooking fires will show me the drift. I'll read them for you. She was quiet for 10 seconds. It was the longest 10 seconds he could remember sitting through in recent history. He could feel Briggs watching from the perimeter. Reyes watching. The two tactical men, wherever they were, no doubt tuned into the specific silence. Then Sarah said, okay, I need 5 minutes to redial the scope for the adjusted conditions. Talk me through what the thermal development will look like at 11:45 so I can build the model before I get behind the glass. He talked. She listened. She asked 3 specific questions, and his answers to all 3 were precise because imprecision at this point was a kind of lie. He wasn't willing to tell her. When he finished, she spent 90 seconds in the notebook. New numbers, revised calculations. The firing solution for 11:45 rather than 1300 scratched out fast, but built on the same 17 years of foundation. She dialed the scope, checked it, settled back into position. I'm ready, she said. At one moment, Khan appeared. Not in the courtyard, not near the propane tanks. He appeared at the entrance of the north building, hostage building, walking out with 2 armed men flanking him, moving with the unhurried proprietary stride that Morgan's intelligence had described. He was speaking to someone inside, pointing at something. Donovan's chest tightened. He's at the hostage building. Sarah said, I see him. That's not his pattern. I know. Don't react. Just watch. Donovan watched. Khan stood at the entrance for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Donovan counted and then moved away toward the center of the compound. The 2 flanking men remained at the north building entrance. One of them lit a cigarette. He went inside, Sarah said. He's checking on them, making sure they're where he needs them. Donovan said, which means he's moving the execution timeline again. Maybe, or he's satisfying himself that everything's in place. She didn't shift, didn't break position. Does it change the shot? He looked at the compound, calculated. The propane tanks were still on the east side. Khan was moving toward them, slowly, circuitously. But the direction of his movement over the last 3 minutes had a trajectory that pointed toward the east wall, as though his evening routine had simply been compressed into midday without Khan himself necessarily being aware of it. No, Donovan said. It doesn't change the shot. He's moving toward the tanks. Then we wait. At 11:28, Reyes said quietly, Sir, Seoul. Donovan moved to him in 4 steps. Reyes handed him a written transcript, Morgan's relay printed shorthand on a small notepad. Donovan read it in 3 seconds. South Korean intelligence assets had confirmed a helicopter was airborne out of a forward position. ETA to the valley was estimated at 35 to 40 minutes. Not noon, not even close to noon, 35 minutes. He looked at his watch. 129. He looked at the compound. Khan was crossing the courtyard now, moving with the slow certainty of a man who believed he was permanent. Still 50 meters from the tanks. Donovan went back to his spotter position, lay down, got behind the scope. New problem, he said. His voice was quiet and controlled and carried everything it needed to carry. Korean extraction helicopter is inbound, 35 minutes. The silence from Sarah's position lasted exactly 2 seconds. If Khan hears a helicopter before I shoot, he executes immediately, yes. Another 2 seconds. Then this shot happens in the next 20 minutes. That's the math. He felt rather than saw her settle deeper into position. A fractional shift in the quality of her stillness from waiting to committed. The difference between a held breath and a decision. Call the Mirage, she said. Mirage is light, running slightly left to right at mid-range. Call it half a minute of angle correction, right? Thermals off the valley floor are early smoke from the south. Cook fire is drifting northeast light, movement consistent. He paused. Wind at our position is 4 knots from the northwest. It will die in the valley. Factor 0 wind at target. Copy. He heard her make a small adjustment, the barely audible click of the windage dial moving 1 increment. Where is he? 30 meters from the tanks, moving slowly. 1 guard 2 meters to his left. The guard position relative to the tanks. Guard will be between Khan and the tanks when Khan reaches his usual position. Guard is not our problem. Blast radius handles everything within 30 feet. He kept the scope on the compound. 25 meters. Khan stopped, spoke to someone. Donovan couldn't see a man who had come out of the east building. They were talking. Khan's hands moved in the emphatic way of someone making a point they considered obvious. The other man nodded several times. Khan pointed at something on the east wall. The other man nodded again. Donovan said, "He's stopped, 20 meters short, talking to someone." Sarah said nothing. Khan continued talking. 40 seconds, 50, a minute. The man he was speaking to produced something, a phone or a radio, hard to tell at this distance. And Khan looked at it. His body language changed. Slight stiffening. Not alarm exactly, more like the stiffening of someone who has received information and is processing whether it requires action. Donovan's mouth went dry. He may have received word of activity in the region, he said. His posture changed. Is he moving toward the building? Khan turned, looked in the direction of the north building, looked at the east wall, looked at the north building again. He's deciding, Donovan said. This was the moment that the entire operation balanced on. Not the shot, not yet. This moment right now. While Zahir Khan stood 20 meters from the propane tanks in full midday sun and made a decision about which direction to walk. If he walked to the north building, the execution moved up. If he walked toward the tanks, the shot was on. If he walked toward the main building and disappeared inside, the window closed, and they had 17 minutes before a helicopter turned everything into chaos. Donovan kept the scope on Khan's face. He'd never seen this man in person, had only a photograph and a satellite image. But at 400 meters in a quality spotting scope, he could see enough. The set of the jaw, the movement of the eyes, the particular body language of someone who had been in command long enough that decisions lived in his posture before they reached his feet. Khan looked at the east wall one more time. Then he walked toward it. He's moving, Donovan said. 15 meters, 10. He's at the tanks. Copy. One word. Absolute. Mirage is consistent, left to right half MOA. Thermals holding steady, northeast drift. Wind 0 at target. His guard is 2 meters left, slightly behind. Copy. Khan is stationary, standing at the east wall, left hand on the near tank. A pause. Donovan breathed. You have the shot, Sarah. The mountain was very quiet. He heard her take one breath in. He heard her release half of it. He heard the specific quality of silence that comes from a human body achieving absolute stillness. Every muscle system in equilibrium. Every involuntary motion suspended, the whole physical organism briefly becoming something more like a precision instrument than a person. He kept his eye on the scope. I watched Khan stand at the east wall of his compound in the Afghan midday sun, one hand resting on a propane tank. entirely unaware that on a ridgeline nearly 3 kilometers above him, a young woman with her father's eyes and her father's patience had been building toward this specific second for her entire life. The Barrett fired. The sound was immediate and enormous, and then gone swallowed by the mountain air. Donovan stayed on the scope. He tracked. He found the trace, that faint shimmer in the air that marked the bullet's path, and he followed it down into the valley, and he watched. 4 seconds of flight time. 4 seconds is a very long time when you are watching through a scope at something that is about to either work or not work, with 2 men's lives and 31 years of unresolved history riding on which one it is. The near propane tank erupted. Not a small explosion, not a contained event. The tank went with the full violence of compressed propane meeting a half-inch hole traveling at supersonic speed, and the second tank, positioned 18 inches away, caught the pressure wave in the heat simultaneously and went 3/4 of a second later. The compound's east wall ceased to be a wall. Everything within 30 feet of that wall ceased to be anything. Donovan kept the scope on the north building. 12 seconds. 15. He was looking for movement, for the hostages, for any sign that the 42 yards of margin had held. A door opened on the north building. A figure came out, moving fast, disoriented but moving. Behind him, another figure, slower. One of them was supporting the other. Torres and Cho, both moving, both alive. Donovan said, "They're out, both of them," moving north toward the extraction point. Sarah had not moved from behind the rifle. She was still in position, still behind the scope. Her breathing had resumed. He could see it in the slight movement of her shoulders. But she hadn't moved. He reached over and put his hand on her shoulder. She let out a breath that was not a sob, but was built from the same material. Something released. Something that had been held for a very long time, under enormous pressure, finally found its exhale. "He's gone," she asked. Quiet, even. "He's gone." She lay still behind the rifle for 5 more seconds. Her right hand, which had been on the grip, released it and moved forward and rested flat on the rock in front of her. Open palm against mountain stone, like she was pressing something into it, or receiving something from it. Donovan didn't speak. This moment wasn't his. He knew that. From behind them, Briggs said, "We need to move. Now." And they moved. Donovan was on his feet in 2 seconds. Sarah was on her feet in 3. She came up from the firing position with the rifle already slung, already moving, already reoriented from shooter to person who needed to cross 4 hours of mountain terrain in less than that. The tactical precision of it, the speed of her transition from one state to the other, struck him even in the middle of everything else. Briggs set the pace, and it was fast. Faster than the approach. The approach had been cautious, measured, silent first. The withdrawal was movement first. Get distance from the ridge. Get out of the valley's line of sight. Put terrain between themselves and whatever was happening in the compound below. Reyes moved at the back, his damaged knee producing an uneven gait that he absorbed without complaint. One of the tactical men dropped back to pace him. They were 4 minutes off the ridge when the sound reached them. Helicopter rotors distant, coming from the southeast. The Koreans. 32 minutes, not 35. Donovan heard Sarah register it, a slight turn of her head, a brief calculation, and then she kept moving. "They'll find Torres and Cho at the extraction point," Donovan said. He was breathing harder than he wanted to admit. The combination of altitude and pace was working on 62-year-old lungs that had opinions about this kind of thing. "Morgan's people will be there. Handoff was always the plan." "Does anyone know we were here?" Sarah asked. "No," she processed that. "That's strange to think about." "It's how it works," he said. "The shot that changes everything leaves no signature." She was quiet for 100 meters of descent. "Then my father shot in Mogadishu, buying you that minute. Did anyone know? Did anyone record it?" Donovan was breathing harder now, watching his footing on the loose rock. The Rangers knew. They wrote it in their after action. It's in a classified file somewhere. A pause for a step that required full attention. "It's in me. That counts." She said, "It counts." They kept descending. At the 2-hour mark of the withdrawal, on a relatively flat section of ridge, where the pace could stay high without the footing being technical, Reyes pulled up sharp. His knee had reached a threshold. Not dramatic, no sound, no fall. He just stopped and stood and looked at his leg, the way you look at a vehicle that's telling you it's done. Donovan saw it. Briggs saw it. One of the tactical men, Caldwell, The one who'd been hanging back came up without being asked and got under Rhea's left arm. The pace adjusted. They kept moving. Sarah moved back into the column and fell into step beside Rhea's right side. Not to help with the physical load Caldwell had that. She just moved there and she stayed there, and she matched his pace without being asked. Reyes looked at her once briefly with the exhausted gratitude of a man who wasn't going to say thank you out loud and didn't need to. Donovan watched it from his position in the column. He watched a 26-year-old woman who had just made a shot that would never be on any record in service of a mission that would never be in any public document for reasons that went back further than she'd been alive. He watched her take a position beside an injured man she barely knew and keep pace with him through 4,000 feet of mountain descent simply because it was the right thing to do. I thought about Ghost Mitchell. He thought about how Ghost had always said that the mission and the person were the same thing, that you couldn't separate how someone operated from who they were, that the quality of a person showed up in every single thing they did, including the things they did when nobody was evaluating them. He thought Ghost Mitchell raised a daughter without ever meeting her, and she turned out exactly right. The thought hit somewhere deep and settled there, not painfully exactly, but with a permanence that told him it would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and every day he had left. At the 4-hour mark, they reached the staging point. Morgan was there. She looked at Donovan when he came through the entrance, looked at his face, read it. Her shoulders dropped by approximately 4 millimeters, which on Patricia Morgan was the equivalent of anyone else collapsing into a chair with relief. Clean, she said. Clean, he said. She looked at Sarah. Sarah met her eyes. Something passed between them that didn't require words and didn't get any. Then Morgan said, Torres and Cho are with the Korean team. Both are injured but stable. Torres has a broken orbital and 2 cracked ribs. Cho is in worse shape, he'll need surgery, but they're alive. She paused. They're both alive. Sarah stood in the doorway of the staging point's main room with the rifle slung on her back and the mountain still in her hair and on her hands, and she nodded once slowly, the way you receive information that you needed to be true and now finally is. Good, she said. Just that. One word. Donovan watched her walk inside. He watched her find a chair against the wall, set the rifle down carefully against the rock beside it, and sit. She put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands. Not crying. He didn't think she was crying. Just taking a moment. Just being inside her own head for 30 seconds in the space between what had just happened and whatever came after it. He went and sat in the chair next to her. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. Outside, a wind had come up off the mountains. The kind of wind that didn't announce itself, just arrived and moved things and reminded you of the scale of the world, relative to the scale of any single thing happening in it. Donovan listened to it for a moment. Then he said very quietly, he would have. I know, Sarah said, from behind her hands. I know. The wind outside the staging point kept moving through the mountain passes, the way it always did, indifferent to what had just happened, indifferent to the weight of it, indifferent to the 2 people sitting against a rock wall in silence while the rest of the team moved around them, with the quiet efficiency of professionals wrapping up the visible evidence of something that would never officially exist. Sarah lifted her face from her hands after a while. She didn't look broken. She didn't look triumphant either. She looked like someone who had carried something very heavy for a very long distance and had finally set it down and was now sitting with the unfamiliar lightness of hands that didn't know what to do when they weren't carrying anything. Donovan recognized that feeling. He'd lived in it off and on for 31 years. What happens now? She asked. Her voice was even, practical. The same voice she'd used to ask about wind corrections and mirage drift and altitude compensation. The voice of someone who moved forward by identifying the next problem. We transport back to Bagram, he said. Clean debrief with Morgan. Then you're on a flight home within 24 hours. He paused. The official record of today will say nothing about you, nothing about me. The Korean team found the hostages. Khan's compound experienced an internal incident consistent with propane storage failure. That's the story. She absorbed that. An internal incident. Yes. She looked at the middle distance for a moment. My father died in an operation that was documented. His name is on a wall. There's a file. People know what he did. She wasn't accusing anyone of anything. She was just comparing 2 different shapes of the same thing. This just disappears. What you did doesn't disappear, Donovan said. It lives in Torres. It lives in Cho. It lives in every person who would have watched that execution video and carried it. He met her eyes. And it lives in me. Same way your father's minute lives in me. Same accounting. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face settled, not resignation, not quite acceptance, but the particular piece of someone who has decided that a thing is enough even if the world doesn't mark it. Okay, she said. Just that. Briggs appeared in the doorway. He looked at Donovan, then at Sarah with the assessment eyes of a man who evaluated readiness for a living. Transport's ready. We need to move in 10. Donovan stood. Sarah stood. She picked up the rifle from against the wall. Careful automatic, the proprietary handling he'd noticed on the Coronado range, a lifetime of respect for the instrument compressed into a single gesture. Briggs watched her do it. He said quiet enough that only the three of them could hear, "Hell of a shot, Mitchell." It was the first time anyone on the team had used her name. The first time anyone other than Donovan had addressed her as something other than a role: the shooter, the asset, the civilian, and acknowledged the person doing the thing. Sarah looked at him. "Thank you," she said, equally quiet, not modest, not overwhelmed, just receiving it the way it was given, directly between people who understood what it cost. Briggs nodded once and disappeared back into operational mode. They moved. The transport back to Bagram was faster than the drive out had been, a different route, more direct. Morgan, navigating from the front seat with the focused economy of someone who was already 3 steps ahead in the sequence of events. Reyes rode with his leg, extended his knee, wrapped now with something from the medical kit, his face the color of someone running on fumes and determination in equal measure. He didn't complain, he updated comms, he did his job. Sarah sat beside Donovan in the second vehicle. She had the worn notebook open on her knee and was writing in it. Not calculations this time, he could tell from the movement of her hand, the different pace of it. Something else. He didn't ask what. Some things you don't interrupt. She closed it after 10 minutes and held it in both hands and looked out the window at the mountains passing. "I used to think," she said, "that if I was good enough, if I trained hard enough and long enough and got precise enough, I'd feel like he was there, like I'd built a bridge back to him somehow." She paused. "I don't feel that. I thought I would." Donovan kept his eyes forward for a moment, then, "What do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Like I understand him better. Not like I've found him. More like I've found the shape of where he was, the outline." Another pause. "That's different from what I expected, but I think it might be more true." Donovan nodded. He understood that distinction better than she probably knew. You don't find the dead, you find evidence of them. You find the marks they left in other people and records, in decisions that rippled forward through time. You find them the way you find something that was moving fast, not by catching it, but by seeing where it went. "He would have liked you," Donovan said. "I told you that at the range. I want to say it again here because it means something different now." He looked at her. "I've known a lot of remarkable people. Ghost was one of the best. What I can tell you from everything I know about who he was is that you are recognizably his. Not because of the shooting, because of how you move through hard things, because of the particular way you're quiet, because you said thank you to Briggs like someone who earned the right to receive it." Sarah pressed her lips together. Not against tears, she wasn't someone who cried easily. He'd established that across the last 2 days. Against something larger and harder to name. "He never got to see any of it," she said. "No," Donovan agreed. "He didn't soften it. She didn't want it softened. He didn't. And that is the specific injustice of what happened to him and to you. And there's no version of this story where that part is okay. He let that sit for a beat. But you made him real today. To me, after 31 years of carrying him as a memory and a debt, you made him real again. Somebody that specific couldn't have raised someone this exact by accident." She turned and looked out the window. He could see the edge of her jaw, the set of it, the thing she was holding in her expression. That was grief and pride in the same space, inseparable, the way they always are when you love someone you've never met. They rode in silence for the rest of the drive. The debrief at Bagram lasted 3 hours. Morgan ran it with the exhausted efficiency of someone who had been awake for 40 hours and was running on professional discipline and institutional caffeine. She took Donovan's account first, then Sarah's, then Briggs's, cross-referencing each against the others and against the signals intelligence that had been running continuously since the operation began. She asked specific questions, she noted specific answers, she closed the file. Then she did something unexpected. She pushed a single piece of paper across the table to Sarah. Plain paper, no letterhead, no official markings. Handwritten. Sarah picked it up and read it, and her face went very still. Donovan, sitting to her left, could not read the content from his angle. He waited. Sarah set the paper down. She looked at Morgan. Where did you get this? The classified file on your father's operation was partially declassified in 2012, Morgan said. Most of it was still held, but this specific section was cleared. She paused. It was in the after-action report filed by the Ranger Unit your father covered on October 3rd. Sergeant First Class Raymond Cole, he wrote it the day after. Sarah picked the paper up again. Read it again. Donovan could see her eyes moving not fast, but with the careful thoroughness of someone making sure they understood every word exactly. She set it down for the second time and put both hands flat on the table. He mentioned me, she said. Quiet, the quietest he'd heard her. Cole's report, my father mentioned me. Donovan looked at Morgan. Morgan said, according to Cole's account during the wait before the operation, Thomas Mitchell told him that he had a daughter he'd never met. He said, she glanced at the paper. He said she's going to be something. I can already tell from the letters her mother sends. Something in the handwriting. She's going to be something, Ray, and I'm going to see it. Morgan stopped. Let the silence hold the words. Cole wrote that in the report because he said he wanted someone to know that Ghost Mitchell talked about his daughter that morning, that she was on his mind going in. The room was very quiet. Sarah did not look up from her hands on the table. Her jaw was working the tiny involuntary movement of someone managing something large in a small space. She took one breath, then another. Then she said, he was right. Just that, 3 words, flat and final and carrying everything. Donovan had to look at the wall for a moment. He was 62 years old and he had seen and done and survived things that had permanently altered his capacity for surprise. And he was looking at the wall of a debrief room in Bagram, Afghanistan, because the alternative was letting a 26-year-old woman see the thing that had just happened to his face. He got it back, looked at the table, picked up his coffee and drank it, and it was cold and he didn't notice. Morgan collected the paper. She held it for a moment. Then she slid it back across the table to Sarah. Keep it, she said. It's a copy. The original stays in the file. A pause. But it was always yours. Sarah folded it carefully, precisely with the same attention she gave everything, and put it in her jacket pocket next to the photograph she'd carried from California. Her father's face in a photograph from '91, and her father's words from a morning in '93, together in the same pocket 31 years late and right on time. Donovan watched her do it. He thought about what a minute costs and what a minute is worth, and he thought it was possible that he finally, after 31 years, understood the exchange completely. The flight back left Bagram at 0600 the following morning. Sarah and Donovan were at the aircraft 2 hours early, which for entirely different reasons was the natural arrival time for both of them. They sat on the tarmac near the C-17's ramp in the pre-dawn dark, 2 people who had not slept in going on 36 hours and had stopped noticing. Donovan had a cup of coffee. Sarah had water. She'd given up coffee sometime in the night without explanation, which he suspected had something to do with the altitude's effect on hydration and which he respected as a practical decision made without ceremony. What are you going to do, he asked, when you get back? She thought about it. I don't know exactly. A pause. I've been living toward one thing for so long. I need to figure out what you do after the one thing. She looked at the dark sky, which was just beginning to show its intentions toward dawn at the eastern edges. I was thinking about what you said at the range, about training people, about the way Ghost's ideas kept moving forward through you into all those trainees. Yes, that's a form of him still being here, she said. What he knew, what he believed about how you shoot and why you shoot and what the distance means, it's still moving. Through you, through whoever those trainees trained. She paused. That's not nothing. No, he said, it's not nothing. I want to do that. She said it with the quiet directness of someone who has found the next destination while sitting still. I want to teach, not necessarily in an official capacity, not necessarily in a military setting, but the knowledge, the ballistics, the patience, the respect for the distance, I want it to keep moving. She looked at him. I think that's what he would have wanted, not just a record, not just one shot, the knowledge moving forward. Donovan looked at his coffee. He thought about 11 years on the Coronado Range. He thought about every conversation he'd had with a trainee about patience and precision in the space between the shooter and the target being full rather than empty. He thought about where those ideas had come from. You should come to Coronado, he said, not as a trainee, as someone who contributes. He chose the word carefully. There's no official framework for what I'm describing, but there doesn't need to be. I've been running that range for 11 years. I decide who participates in the advanced instruction. He met her eyes. Ghost Mitchell spent his career turning what he knew into better people. You've been doing that your whole life, whether you knew it or not. There are trainees on that range who need to hear what you know about distance and patience from someone who learned it the way you learned it. Not as career preparation, but as something closer to a calling. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. In the early dark, with the airport sounds around them, and the mountains behind them, and the long flight home ahead, she looked like what she was, a young woman at the beginning of something she couldn't fully see. Yet standing at the edge of the next thing with the same quality of stillness she'd brought to every ridge and every range she'd ever occupied. You'd have to stop laughing when I walk through the gate, she said. He felt it start in his chest before it reached his face, the laugh. Real and unguarded, and the first one he'd had that wasn't edged with something complicated and longer than he could easily calculate. That was one time, he said, and I caught myself. After approximately 4 seconds. 3, she almost smiled, the almost smile that was her father's. Okay, she said, Coronado. He nodded, drank his coffee. They sat in a comfortable quiet for several minutes, the kind of quiet that exists between people who have been through something together and no longer need to fill the space between them with sound. Then Sarah said, the Coriolis effect. He looked at her. At 851 yards in California, the shot that broke the record. I want you to know I accounted for the Coriolis effect. She said it the way someone says a thing they've been holding for a while, not bragging, not defending, just completing a thought. People always assume at extreme range it's luck or conditions. It wasn't luck. I know, he said. I saw your dial settings before you shot. I knew. He paused. I didn't say anything because you didn't need me to. She nodded. That was sufficient. That was exactly sufficient. The sky was getting lighter. The C-17 was being prepped behind them fuel truck's ground crew. The machinery of departure assembling itself with the indifferent competence of things that happen on schedule regardless of what the people nearby are carrying. At some point during the flight, somewhere over the ocean, somewhere between the world where this had happened and the world that didn't know it had, Sarah fell asleep. It happened without transition, the way it does when the body finally overrules everything else and simply takes what it needs. Her head tipped back against the fuselage wall, her hands in her lap, the worn notebook resting under her right hand. Donovan stayed awake. He sat across from her in the dim interior of the transport, and he looked at Ghost Mitchell's daughter sleeping in a jump seat 30,000 feet over the Pacific with a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket that said she was going to be something, and he thought about debts and minutes and what 31 years actually meant when you carried them properly. He had spent 3 decades believing that his debt to Ghost Mitchell was a weight, something that pressed down, something that diminished something he owed and could never fully pay because the creditor was unreachable. He had spent 31 years wrong about that. The debt wasn't a weight, it was a direction. It had pointed him toward 11 years of training other people with everything Ghost had taught him. It had pointed him toward the gate at Coronado when a young woman held up a photograph. It had pointed him up a mountain in Afghanistan and back down again. And now it pointed toward tomorrow, toward a range in California and a new kind of conversation about distance and patience and the things that live in the space between a shooter and a target. Ghost Mitchell had bought him a minute in Mogadishu. He had spent that minute every single day for 31 years. He had spent it forward into other people, into their training, into their survival. And now Sarah Mitchell would spend it forward too, into whoever she taught, into whatever they carried, into the long unbroken chain of a dead man's knowledge, moving through the world like a bullet in flight, still going, still true, still finding its mark long after the moment of firing had passed. The aircraft held them both, and the ocean moved beneath them, and the world kept turning at exactly the rate it always had, indifferent to the particular weight of what was being carried across it. When they landed at North Island and the ramp came down, and the California morning came in that specific Pacific coastal morning, cool and salt-edged and unhurried, Sarah woke up the way she did everything else, fully, without transition, present immediately. She looked at Donovan. He looked at her. Home, she said. Home, he agreed. They walked off the ramp together. Donovan carried nothing but his jacket, and 31 years of a debt finally understood. Sarah carried a rifle and a notebook and a folded piece of paper, and the precise knowledge of exactly how far a person can reach when they've been aiming their whole life. At the bottom of the ramp, Morgan was there. She had somehow beaten them back the particular logistics of intelligence work that nobody questions. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets, her face doing the thing it did when it was trying to express something it hadn't been trained to express. She looked at Sarah. Your father's file is being updated, she said. The section covering October 3rd, 1993, the full account, including Cole's report, including the commendation that was filed, and then buried in the classification, is being reviewed for full release. A pause. It may take time. These things always take time, but it's moving. Sarah looked at her for a moment. Why now? Morgan held her gaze. Because yesterday demonstrated that some debts don't expire, and because the people who can authorize the release needed a reason that was current. A very small pause. They have one now. Sarah absorbed that. She nodded once the way she received everything completely without performance. Morgan put out her hand. Sarah shook it. No words. None were needed. Donovan watched Morgan walk away and thought that Patricia Morgan was at her best, the kind of person who moved things that needed moving and asked for nothing in return except that they stay moved. He had underestimated her occasionally across the years. He noted this and filed it. He and Sarah stood on the tarmac in the California morning for a moment. The base moved around them, aircraft, vehicles, personnel, the ongoing ordinary machinery of a place that prepared people for hard things. Sarah looked at the range in the distance. The target frames were visible from here, small against the flatlands. The wind flags moving in the morning air, coming off the water. Same time next week, she said. He looked at her. The range opens at 0700. I know, she said. I'll be there at 0650. He almost said something. He stopped himself because there was nothing to say that improved on what she'd just said and how she'd said it. He just nodded. She picked up the rifle case and walked. He watched her go straight back, deliberate, with a quality of forward motion that was entirely her own and entirely her father's, inseparable, in the same way that grief and pride are inseparable, in the same way that a debt and a direction are finally, when you understand them right, the same thing. Ghost Mitchell had said on a morning in Mogadishu in 1993 that his daughter was going to be something. He had said it to a man he trusted in the hours before he died, and then he had gone and done what needed doing and left the rest to the world to carry forward. The world had carried it, imperfectly, belatedly, across 31 years of detours and delays, in a classification status that held the truth at arm's length until the truth found its own way through. But it had carried it all the way to a California range, on a morning in October, to a record that fell in a shot that echoed across a mountain valley on the other side of the world, to a piece of paper folded in a jacket pocket, to a young woman walking across a tarmac with her father's eyes and her father's patience, and everything he never got to teach her that she had somehow learned anyway. Thomas Mitchell had bought a minute. His daughter had spent it across a lifetime. And the distance between them all, the years, all the miles, all the silence, had turned out to be exactly the range she'd been training for.